Hello, I wanted to share with you the presentation I gave at Philosophy Book Club this previous weekend. I think this presentation will be particularly useful almost by definition. I got to do this in one go, so sorry if I screw up at all. There's tech issues, blame Microsoft. Okay, so how pragmatism works. The maxim, if it's useful, use it. If it's not useful, don't use it. So for pragmatists, truth is gauged only on predictive behavior. If I take a pen and I drop it, we can predict how long that takes to, say, hit the ground. And we can use our different formulas, kind of given by science, to predict how long it would take. So that's something that's very useful. Maybe if it's not perfect, we can factor in things like wind resistance, but the idea is that this stuff is actually great at predicting things. Something that would not be useful is just say like lofty scientific studies. I think we've all seen different psychology or like political or economic scientific studies that don't really actually correlate with reality. And a pragmatist would say then that is not truth if it's not useful. So I'll break this presentation up into three parts. Stick with me through the first part. It's kind of the dense sort of philosophy part, kind of explaining why we chose pragmatism. And then after that, it gets pretty easy. We have our useful pragmatic tools. This is what I really want you here for. I think you'll find that section particularly useful. And then finally, I bash Plato in our fun stuff. So by part three, you can kind of just like take it easy, but definitely you want to be alert for part two. So one of the questions that comes up, at least to myself, was what does it mean for something to exist? So I look at this like coffee cup. There's probably like some sort of like atoms here or some sort of material thing. And without getting like too skeptic, we'll just say that like this exists. However, what about this idea that, say, I'm closer to a TV than a grocery store? Does that idea exist? Um, Maybe you have asked the question, do circles exist? If we went to another universe, are there circles there too? Well, pragmatist says it doesn't matter. If it's useful to treat it like it exists, let's use it. And if it's not useful, let's not use it. So I'm going to do some like rounding of some rough edges. So this is not the area to at me in like the YouTube comments because definitely trying to round things out for simplicity's sake. So 100 years ago, philosophy changed forever, and one of the questions they asked was, "Well, what is truth?" So there's four options, and this is the first one is the correspondence theory of truth. This is probably what you think of as truth, and it probably is probably close to what I actually think is actual truth. But the idea is that these match reality. So when I said that statement about me being closer to a TV than the grocery store, well, that matches reality. And that all sounds great until you start asking questions of, well, what is reality? So no one really knows. So then at some point we have to make assumptions. Think about like we don't really understand what quarks are. Um, so this is kind of where correspondence theory falls apart. Um, the closest sort of like branch of meta philosophy would be analytical philosophy. So this is coming up with true statements. If I say the phrase "one is equal to one," everyone's going to agree with that. Those are just true statements. If I say conventional justice is fairness, natural justice is the will of the strong, you're probably not going to disagree with those either. And if you do, we can maybe add some more words until these become true. Coherence theory of truth, we built systems. So with these systems, we have this like desire to connect them. I kind of feel like this is what either like a political party or religion would say is truth. We decide all of these things kind of line up good enough, and that is truth. This relates back to philosophy in that the coherence theory of truth really pushes Plato's original questions as valid and worth digging into. So when we ask questions of, well, what is justice? Plato would say, well, justice is fairness, and here's all the reasons for why it is. So I believe that meta philosophy is continental philosophy. And I think a lot of us have a hard time thinking that this is actual truth, but it's one of the theories of truth, so I want to bring it up. And then what we're all here for, pragmatism. So truth here is gauged only on its predictive capabilities. And then number four, all of the above. And again, I kind of said this is simple, but this is actually the one I subscribe to. Let's use all the theories of truth as long as it's useful. So in school, they taught us Platonic realism or scientific realism. People said that there really are atoms that are round. It's not just people talking. This isn't just language. This isn't just us looking at sensors. There really are these specific things we call atoms. They also said that the edges of our different scientific systems are real. Think about biology. We say, well, these cells are real. However, if you really look into it, the edges of a cell, the atoms there, they don't know that they're part of a cell. They interact with whatever is next to the cell. So there's not really a defined boundary. And this is kind of one of the issues with scientific realism. So the alternative that I'm presenting here is instrumentationalism. Science is a construct of human language, but instrumentationalism basically proposes that, well, science is really useful, let's use it, but let's not make any grand claims that, these atoms are really round. So I love this phrase, we squeak and squawk and we say, this is a universal truth. It kind of broke my heart when I learned there's really nothing special about a circle and the number pi. Humans have built this up themselves. So let's ask the question, well, what is math? And math, we basically make true statements. So when we say 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, that's because we define it as true. We drew these scratches on a piece of paper and we said that these equations are true. So I'm going to do a hands-on exercise, and I guess I left my paper over here. I hope you can see this okay. But we're going to draw a circle. We're going to invent pi. So I'm going to make a circle the size of this pen. So I'm going to kind of rough it out. I'm not going to be perfect, but okay, pretty close to that, the size of the pen. The diameter is the size of the pen. Now, how many times do we have to go around the circle? 2, 3, maybe 3.1 times. And that's what we call pi. Humans have decided that this number is noteworthy. Now, if I drop some crumbs on my desk and I measure that distance, what makes that distance less significant than that of pi? So I want to look at science here. Now, I cannot deny science is super useful. I use it all the time in my job. We all use science, right? I mean, we cure cancer and stuff like that with science. But when you look into what science is, it turns out to be like a construct of human language, just as math. The example that I've gotten is we can imagine a table with black and white splotches. If we use, say, a fishnet with squares and it's a fine enough resolution, we can pretty accurately describe that table. But why use squares? Why not use hexagons? If we use a hexagon and we use a fine enough resolution, we'll also be able to describe that table pretty much just as accurately. So again, we squeak and we make words, and that was our starting point for science. And then we've continuously built upon this. Okay, you survived. That was about as philosophical as it gets. So now I'm going to give you some very useful ideas that you can apply. So again, let's talk about that maxim. If it's useful, use it. If it's not useful, don't use it. If whatever belief you have can help you predict some outcome, let's keep it. And if it doesn't, discard it, or maybe we try to refine it until it becomes useful. So again, if a scientific study is working, let's keep it. And if you apply that scientific study and it didn't work, don't use it. So I remind you again that a pragmatist says truth is only defined by its predictive capabilities. All right, so Platonic universals are dead. The liberation has begun. So universals don't exist. This is both sad to me and liberating. There is no such thing as perfect justice. There is no perfect love. There is no perfect moral system. There's no perfect way to live life. However, I almost want you to think, have you considered these were actually real? Have you ever thought that there was a real justice, like a real love, what it means to love, or like a perfect beauty? No, those were taught to us, and this is kind of, say, outrage and disgust at old men. Someone has kept propagating this idea that there are these perfect things. So I want to let you know, Western civilization has been infected by Plato, and pragmatism is your antibiotic. All right, this is just among one of the most useful things you're going to get out of this, and that's pluralism. So you can use more than one answer to solve a question. So I want to end monism. You don't need black and white answers. If it's useful, let's use multiple answers, and let's treat this as more of like a gray area. So an example I can give is, let's say we're trying to come up with the price of a banana. So you can monistically say the price of a banana is 59 cents a pound and be done with it. But is it more useful if we say it's 59 cents a pound with a normal bell curve over it? If that helps make better predictions, let's use it. It might not actually follow the normal bell curve, but it's better than giving a monistic answer. And then I find this funny and almost like a letdown, but the pragmatist meaning of life. So you ask a pragmatist, what's the meaning of life? And a pragmatist answers, why don't you find all the meanings of life, or find a bunch of meanings of life, and then whatever is useful, let's use those. So you're also free to use monism. So you don't always have to be a pluralist. In the event that my wife had to pick out a dress for a wedding, she can't wear two dresses to the wedding. She can only wear one. So there are cases you might find a one-to-one relationship with something. And if you do, you can be a monist in that case. But pluralism lets you use both. And then kinds. So the idea here is that you can correctly identify a kind, you can be sure of its properties. So a circle, like we drew earlier, this is no perfect circle, but it had pretty much that pi times d equals circumference. If you make a mistake and you think a hexagon is a circle, that's not the same kind, and you're not going to have the same perimeter. So let me give you an example of maybe making a mistake on a kind. So let's ask the question, does a luxury car driver have lots of money? I'm going to say, no, I think you're stereotyping there. What if they inherited that car? What if they stole that car? What if they borrowed it? But maybe we can find some conclusions on a luxury car driver. They probably have maybe some sort of eyesight that is helping them drive. They probably know how to drive a car. So by correctly identifying the kind, you can correctly identify its properties. And then kind of saving you some time, especially if you get into philosophy, you don't have to waste time on things that don't matter. So the purpose of all of this thought is so when you do run into something, you can actually have a habit that you can act on. And then I got fun stuff. So really take those last few. You're going to use those last 5 examples. But now just some fun stuff. So let's ask the question, what is it? What is useful? And maybe we don't have to be a monist here. So I like asking the question, well, like, what is happiness? And I'll say, like, is it useful to get the right brain chemicals in the right place at the right time? I would say that sounds pretty useful if you're trying to be happy. And there's maybe some more there as well. Let's not be monists. How about this? Is having children useful? Are your parents useful, or do they just drive you crazy? How about your significant other? And my wife got a pass here. But maybe you think about some of your friends. Maybe you have a friend that's not useful. And then I want you to contemplate your moral system. So whenever you say the word good or bad, you're expressing some sort of valuation. So morals are, like, almost by definition, your valuation of things. So next time you say that's good or that's bad, consider, well, when you said it was good, is that because it's useful and bad is not useful? Are these old ideas you had useful to whatever your goals are, whatever you're trying to accomplish? Okay, let's dunk on the Platonic realist. So this comes from William James' Pragmatism, and he differentiates the tender-minded from the tough-minded. So the tender-minded, and maybe you know people like this, they're very rational. They like Plato. They're logical. They're idealists. They believe in universals. They're monistic. Maybe they're introverts. Maybe you think of them as softies, and potentially they lean a bit more religious. Or meanwhile, you have your tough minded, they're empirical, they need to see actual evidence. Maybe they're fans of Aristotle, as mentioned, evidence. They're realistic about things. And instead of using universals, they use kinds. So this is like a nominalistic take. They're pluralists, they're potentially extroverts, maybe they're hard, and they're not typically religious. And then I want to warn you of a rationalist conflating things like one is equal to one to claims like justice is fairness. They'll pretend that these are potentially like equivalent. So when you actually look at reality, those systems are not necessarily um, a system of truth that relies on predictive capabilities, but maybe how the world ought to be. So this is maybe some of the pitfalls of pragmatism. So you get to hear maybe some of the issues. So my kid asked, "Well, how far away is home?" And I told him, "Well, it's about, I don't know, 5 minutes." And instead of telling him it was like 3 miles away, I told him the time. Now I think all scientists would say, well, it's more true to tell him the number of miles, but it was useful for my 6-year-old kid to just know how many minutes away we were. I have kind of like a fun like running race idea because I'm a little bit of a bigger dude. Instead of just doing your final time for a running race, I wanted to include your mass. So the SI unit here, we'd use like some sort of momentum. So that's just mass times your, say, average speed. But I decided to play around with the units. Like a pragmatist doesn't care as long as it's useful, right? Why not use mass to the 100 power multiplied by your average speed? Well, if you do that, you end up getting basically like a weight contest. Whoever's the heaviest wins. So even in this case, pragmatism still comes out kind of on top here. It doesn't make claims that you should use this, but uh, basically pragmatism will open up possibilities of using math that is, say, not traditional. But I guess one of the points here is if you do find some sort of mathematical equation that models the world in a way that's useful, let's use it. And if it's not useful, don't use it. But I believe pretty much all of statistics relies on pragmatism. So, all right, this one is the big hole. This one kind of will irk me a bit. Does God exist? So pragmatists would say, well, God might not be able to help you figure out if you're going to be able to part the Red Sea, but if it makes you happy, um, maybe that's useful. Maybe God does exist because it was useful. All right, so just kind of wrapping up, I'm just dunking on some Plato some more. Plato is an infection. Universals aren't real, and there's no reason you need to be a monist. Okay, you are cured of Plato. You are free. I want to remind you, use your predictive capabilities as a source of truth. You don't need perfect equations and logic. You don't have to believe in mystical universals like justice or love or beauty. They also give you like unrealistic expectations on things. And then there's no reason you have to stress over having a single answer. You can use pluralism and you can have gray areas. I'm telling you, you can use kinds, and there's no need to care if something exists. If it's useful, use it. If it's not useful, don't use it. And I'll end with Plato is an infection.